Today on the show is Mary Price. Mary is a Talent 100 winner and a veteran builder of high-performing talent teams at companies like Apple, LinkedIn, Slack, and Salesforce.
What really resonated with me was you quickly realize you're in a position where you have a job that changes people's lives. And for me, that was the meaning. That was the point.
You've had an amazing trajectory since your time at Apple. Talk a little bit about what it means to go on and build some of these amazing companies, like the work you did with Slack, the work you did with LinkedIn, and what you're doing now.
That's part of it. Is I think when you can join something that is still growing or has the potential to grow and make this significant impact on the world, and you want to be part of building it and making it better, that's where the opportunity is.
Recruiters, do you know those moments where you're juggling 15 roles, 10 hiring managers, and 3 different outreach tools, and you just think, there's gotta be a better way to do this? That's where Grayscale comes in. It's an AI assistant built for recruiters, not just another generic chatbot. Grayscale lives inside your ATS, whether it's Greenhouse, Workday, or SAP, and it automates candidate updates, reminders, and outreach across text, WhatsApp, and chat. I've seen teams use it, cut time to fill by 30%, and cut ghosting in half without losing the human touch. Because this isn't about replacing recruiters, it's about freeing them up to do the stuff that actually matters, closing great candidates. So if you're building a real talent machine, check out grayscaleapp.com and tell them Building the Talent Machine sent you. Hey, what's up, everybody? Today on the show is Mary Price. Mary is a Talent 100 winner and a veteran builder of high-performing talent teams at companies like Apple, LinkedIn, Slack, and Salesforce, Abnormal Security, and now she's the VP of Talent Acquisition and Talent Management at Trust. Mary blends data-driven recruiting with human-first leadership to scale orgs through hypergrowth and real culture change. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm pumped to be here and excited to chat with you and share whatever I can that might be helpful for the viewers out there.
Yeah, Mary, this is so exciting. I really enjoyed just a little chit chat in our pre-show because we just met and we've never connected. A lot of the guests on the show, as I mentioned, are friends. And I like to make fast friendships through this show, through this platform. So I'm so excited to chat a little bit about your background and what has you up at night when it comes to recruiting.
I love it. You sound like a recruiter. That's what we do. We make friends quickly. I love that.
It's literally the job. It's pretty crazy. I had no idea when I got into it that's what it would be. What's it like for you?
No, I feel the same way. I really feel like when I think back on what I wanted to be when I grew up, I really didn't have an answer because I felt like, I don't know, I like people, I like sales, I like helping people. And I fell into recruiting, which I think everybody falls into recruiting. But what really resonated with me was you quickly realize you're in a position where you have a job that changes people's lives. And for me, that was the meaning, that was the point. And I wanted to really help people because I could go back to my life and career and pinpoint how a job literally changed the whole trajectory of the rest of my life. And what a privilege to be able to do that for people. And you do build those relationships with people over time. And in some cases, you help people over and over get a new job. Yeah, I would say that is what it was for me. And then just that deeper meaning of playing that small role in changing someone's life.
When you mentioned that trajectory, was that moment when you went from a store manager at Apple to a regional recruiter?
I would say that was definitely one of the pivotal moments of my career. I grew up as a first-generation American, so I didn't have the network and the connections that other people might that grew up in this country and that had parents in corporate America. My mom was a waitress. My dad was an electrician or a mechanic, and they even were from 2 different countries themselves. So when I got into Apple, started actually in high school where, not to make a very long story even longer, but I'll make it really short, our teacher was an Apple Distinguished Educator. So we got exposure to Apple corporate on the education side early on. Then when they went to open the stores, they tapped their network and I was recommended to work in the store. And that just changed, that changed the whole trajectory of my life for sure, because at that time, Apple didn't have stores. So it was the new thing. It was the risk. It was like, oh, articles, they should close up shop. They'll never do it. Gateway is the store, if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And then Apple over time became the most successful retailer in history. That growth enabled me to transition into corporate, where Steve Jobs and Ron Johnson, who was the SVP of retail at the time, got together and said, we have all this talent in retail, and how can we give them corporate experience and exposure? And so they opened up like 25 roles in corporate, and I was part of the inaugural cohort for that exchange program. And they opened up a recruiting role, and actually the recruiter that hired me into the Apple store hired me on his team. He was now a recruiting manager. And so
Love
I
it.
was, yeah. So that I get goosebumps actually telling you that story. And I've told that story many times, but that moment totally changed my life because I went from retail to corporate, and that was it. And I was in corporate at that point for the rest of my career and was able to change thousands of people's lives that ended up getting hired into the Apple retail ecosystem. Later, many of them moved to corporate or other cool jobs. Yeah, just a wild time. But yes, I would say that was one of the moments that changed the rest of my life, for sure.
Mary, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing the emotional side of what it's like to recall that story. I have a very similar experience of a recruiter changing my life, recruiting retail roles, and having that experience of just high volume retail hiring. And you never know what can change someone's life. Often, folks that are working in retail are living paycheck to paycheck. They may not have the best local community in their work experience. They may not have the best customers that they're working with. So when you get to hire somebody who's working in a customer facing role that brings fulfillment, social security, health benefits, store discount, all of that, man, I never lose sight of those people. And I think back on 10 years of hiring and recruiting, and like those are the roles that are more meaningful to me, not like the $500,000 a year total comp role that was a headhunted one of one position. I had one shot on goal. It's all these people that I hired to work in a retail store, and there was like a true sense of community. So it's cool to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. There's actually, when you say that, it makes me reflect on like the cohort of us at that time. And there were different versions because I was in the store for 4 years. A lot of those people went on to do some pretty cool stuff. One of them is now head of product at Canva, and he was a genius at the Genius Bar in that store in San Diego. Another is the head of product at Tonal, and he was a genius at the Genius Bar. And so these are like when you're earlier in your career, and I'm going to quote Steve Jobs, but it is so hard to look forward and see how the dots are going to connect. It's only when you look back that you can see exactly how the dots connect.
Yes.
And it's really cool because when you're younger, you're okay, I'm in the book. This is my chapter 1 or 2. But it's so easy to compare and look at people's chapter 10 or 20 and say, oh my gosh, I want to be the head of recruiting at company or whatever the job is. But they took baby steps to get there. And in some cases, you get luckier than others, but the dots do connect, and you just have to keep on keeping on and take action and just keep going because you don't always have the answers, but the dots do connect. And it becomes very clear why each experience was meant for you and like where it ultimately will take you.
It's so true. And I think that's the beauty of recruiting. I think recruiters are inherently wonderful optimists. The next great placement, the next great candidate is one phone call away. And the reward is far more fulfilling than, say, a sales contract. Like anybody can go through some sales training and try and get somebody on the other end of the phone to write a check for software with budget out of somebody else's money. But when it comes to the empathy and optimism to get on the phone and connect with a complete stranger and sell them that opportunity, I love that reality of people falling into recruiting is because the people who fall into it and find their way into it are some of the special folks that I have relationships with today that I call friends. And it's a beautiful experience because it is helping people, and especially recording this around the seasonality of my 10th year in recruiting. But you've had an amazing trajectory since your time at Apple. Talk a little bit about what it means to go on and build some of these amazing companies, like the work you did with Slack, the work you did with LinkedIn, and what you're doing now.
Yeah. I love this question because when I think back on my career, I've always been a builder. I've always wanted to be part of contributing to something and making it better. And I think that comes from my roots, my family, of honestly being a first generation American and not having all the answers or things figured out and wanting better for myself and my family. And I think that even though most would know the logos that you just mentioned, I think it's really important to call out that I joined at a much smaller phase of those companies. So even
Yes.
when I joined Apple, we had, I want to say like 15,000 employees. And then by the time I left, close to 100,000. And when I joined, to put it into context, because this is like crazy, Apple was about 5 billion in revenue at the time. And by the time I left, it was like 150 billion.
It's crazy.
And so that's when I know billions even sounds giant, but think about Apple now has $1 trillion valuation and all that. So it's, and then even at LinkedIn, I think when I joined, we had 300 million members. And then by the time I left, it was closer to 700 million. And we were doing 8 billion when I joined. And by the time I left, it was closer to 20. So that's part of it is I think when you can join something that is still growing or has the potential to grow and make this significant impact on the world, and you want to be part of building it and making it better, that's where the opportunity is. The opportunity isn't at, hey, we're at the peak, and now we just need people to maintain. There are, I think, personalities for that work, and there's work in those maturation phases of a company. But for me, it was always really attractive to go into something that really was exciting and growing and needed the skills that I had to help take it to whatever that next level was. And so even at Slack, when I joined, they were a year post their DPO. They did a direct public offering, not an initial public offering. And when I joined Slack, they had a great team of recruiters and a brand that people so loved and use daily. People love Slack. When you talk about Slack, people love it. And I think that even then, though, there was this opportunity to mature things. So when you have been part of growing and evolving the technology, the systems, the processes, the relationships, the credibility in your craft, whether it's recruiting or something else, you're able then to get to a point where you're running at best in class. And know that because all the data, both quantitative and qualitative, are telling you that, right? Your offer acceptance rates, your CSATs, all that. And then even just your feedback that you're getting from the market. And I think back and I'm like, it was only because there were problems and there were opportunities that there was value in joining and helping solve that. And so I always looked for that in my career. And even joining OneTrust, I got a call from someone that actually, it was funny. I tried to recruit at my prior company. He ended up coming here. And then when they had the need for the head of recruiting, he called me and he said, hey, I don't know if you're looking, but we're hiring and I think you'd be great. And I actually was trying to take a year off. And I should do like we should do a talk one day just on taking a break because it is so important.
Yes.
And I was trying to take a break and then I was like, let's just catch up. I'm not interested in the job, but let's just catch up. And we caught up. And then I was like, all right, tell me what the problem is. What's going on? And then it explained to me, my problem is I always love solving a problem. So as he explained it, I was like, I can help you guys with this.
Sound rolls.
Yeah, and I'd say that's the thing to look for. As you're building these great companies, you're solving problems. And so is there a match between the problem that those companies are having and your skill set? And it's not about you necessarily being CEO, but can I add value here? And does that drive you and motivate you? Because some people don't care. But if for you, you're one of those people that love to build, I still think even now is the time to do that because there are so many new companies coming up that are building and growing, especially in the AI space, and they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I love that. I think it also comes down to just finding something to build. There is so much with the advancement of AI that can be applied to the recruiting workflow that if you've got a great idea, go shoot the shot. Like I know recruiter friends that are going out and they're building companies on their own time or they're working on a project in their 5 to 9, as they say, after their 9 to 5. And it's exciting because there's nothing really that differentiates a recruiter from a founder to build in this space. And over the course of the last year, I've been talking to a lot of folks that are building that are former recruiters. And I love that because there's so many problems to solve for if you look for them. And hearing you describe that desire to be a builder, I think is so critical for a certain subset of recruiters because that's what's going to find new pattern disruptive ways to reach candidates. And When I think about how AI is going to change recruiting, we're bolting AI onto an existing process, but the existing process might not be the best way to hire people. So I think we've got a lot in aperture of where we could take AI, but I want to hear from you. Like, what do you think some of the cool use cases for AI could be for recruiting?
This is such a good question and something that me and my team spent a lot of time thinking about. Excuse me. I think some of the more interesting use cases are going to be around how do we make very obvious the person that is literally the best and the most qualified for the job, and how, if even possible, do we then take the top of funnel from the qualified skills, but is there actually going to be a way to also make that human connection? Which I think we are a long way from, but I think that will be the point where, wow, AI gets a little dangerous here, is like in the human aspect. Will it be able to match connection between people? Because at the end of the day, what I believe is that right now you can't AI human connection. You cannot AI that. You cannot say, hey, Mary, I looked at your background and your resume, and Brandon, I've looked at yours. I think you guys would work really well together, because you don't know those human characteristics, the emotional connection. Like, what do I look for? I always look for people that have grit and hunger and give a shit factor. So someone else may just be like, I just need an operator. I don't really care to connect. I don't really care about finding someone coachable. So is AI going to be able to figure those things out? I don't think so. But I do think that it will help with top of the funnel. I also think some very interesting use cases are the concept of a 24/7 recruiter. So sure, you've heard of this at this point, where it's, that always on top of the funnel for applicants. They can self-select in to do the initial interview, which is just those baseline set of questions. That, I think, increases capacity, but also has to be tested a little bit more in terms of, does that actually add more of a volume of work? Because you'll get thousands of applicants, but you're only going to get maybe a few dozen or a few hundred that do that interview. And then how does that help even with the selection process? I find that one fascinating, because part of recruiter capacity is that you cannot work 24/7.
And that one is going to come down to cost of compute. So, what does it cost for a recruiting team to buy that access to the LLM? What is the margin that vendor is navigating with the AI lab they're using to bring that product to market? And will those things align? And how will recruiting be a strategic advisor to finance to say, hey, look, headcount is smaller than last year. Cost per hire is increasing. Here's why. Yes, this is something that we haven't seen in 10 to 15 years when we all came up. And how will we move forward with a new understanding of cost per hire and software budgets? And Mary, when I think about your experience now and how you've developed your career, how do you operationalize that combined talent acquisition, talent management, so that recruiting has an impact in onboarding, L&D, and performance? You described being a builder. To me, that's what a builder does. They're connected to the post-hire outcome.
Yeah. I love this. Part of this was an outcome of changes in the business. And I think with a lot of companies, you have seen contractions of teams, consolidations of focus areas. I've actually seen many people that now have a new role where it's talent acquisition and talent management, because you think of the employee life cycle, it's really that front end of the experience. And you could argue that recruiting is part of onboarding, because I believe that we are onboarding in the initial outreach with attraction. Just in how you attract people, you're starting to onboard them into the way of thinking at the company. What is the mindset? What's our culture? What are our values? What do we care about? Do you identify with us, with this world? And so one of the ways that I operationalize blending and bringing the two teams together, there's a few different things. Very simply, I have one leadership team meeting. So my leaders in L&D and my leaders in TA are together. And in the way that we prep for our weekly team meeting, everyone, it's the basic things. Nothing is like rocket science, but we all have a shared agenda, and everyone is expected to put into that and then make comments. And we use our time together to discuss, debate, and decide. That's how we work. We don't come to the meetings to provide updates. My belief is that, and this is a byproduct, I think, of working at Slack for the years that I did, if it's an update, it should be sent ahead of time and it should be sent in a Slack or a Teams message. I don't want to use our time together to update each other. That would be a waste of our time. We should be solving the problems and coming to agreements as a leadership team. So that's what we do. In addition to that, we actually work really closely together on things like where are we going to be seeing growth and what do we need to be considering in terms of that next layer, right? So you hire and then what is the onboarding experience like? What are our onboarding dates? What are those locations? Are there locations where we're going to be hiring more of, less of? So do we need to adjust our onboarding strategy for that? In addition to that, we stay really closely like as a talent. So I have a head of talent brand on my team. She works very closely with marketing. So in a lot of ways, she's the liaison between the talent acquisition team and then the talent brand team because our story changes.
Well,
Our employee value proposition changes. Our company value proposition changes. Our mission change. Things change, right? This is just the way of the world. And so she is that thread line too between what is the story that we tell at onboarding and how do we connect the dots? And then what is the story we're telling candidates and how are we connecting their personal mission and visions and values to ours? So it is all very connected. And then the last thing I would say is that we do a leadership development program that we developed in-house. And I've blended that in with my talent acquisition team too. So they have created something called Hiring Foundations, which teaches people how to hire. That's part of one of the different modules that we cover in Leadership Foundations. And so it's really about that like front end process of an employee life cycle. And that's how I've thought about blending it. And it's worked really well for us. And I think that there's so much more that I could share, but at a high level, those are three things that we do right now to operationalize blending the teams.
how do you get executive buy-in around internal mobility, L&D, all of these types of career pathing discussions instead of acquiescing to maybe the simpler solution, which is well, let's just go to market and find the folks we need and we'll throw a little bit of extra budget at top talent?
So we have worked really closely with our executives on even leadership foundations, as an example, and hiring foundations. Luckily, we have a CEO who believes that recruiting is one of everyone's three jobs. So that makes it, I would say, a little easier because you can depend on that. However, not everything a CEO says is what everyone's going to jump up and do. And so I do think that our relationships with the executives have really mattered there. And we've spent a lot of time building and gaining their trust and coming to the table with data around your talent pool. Where do we find talent? How long does it take? Who are the best partners on your team that we love to work with? When it comes to also the leadership development aspect and then even investing in talent within the company, same type of thing. What is the data? Where's the concentration of leaders? What is even their retention rate look like? What is the performance of their teams? And so giving that information and then being able to back that up with what is our plan to support those leaders that are doing well, and then also the ones that probably need a little more support from us and how that will translate to outcomes for the business, like making that story really clear for them and then getting their input into the design process. So we pulled all the data for every functional leader, executive in the company. And we went around and did a little bit of like a learning tour with them and really tried to extract as much information about what they thought was really important when it came to developing talent and leaders. And we then built that into the design. Not every single thing did we say yes to, but we calibrated, right? Around like, most of you said this. Here is what we're going to do. And then we prototyped it. So we treated it like a design thinking exercise, almost like a product team, where our product is the people and this training program. We're going to build a prototype that we're going to test and we're going to learn from that. And so we had surveys and we had data that we were collecting. And then after each session, we iterated on that. And then we shared that feedback. And so we had points on the board and we were able to give like a whole narrative of something that we were trying and prototyping and testing and iterating, just like a design and a product team would. And I think the business really responds well when you're speaking their language and things like this, because it's not, hey, we're committing to this permanent thing that we're never going to evolve from. Because I think that's the mistake that a lot of talent and people leaders present, is this is the thing that we're doing. And I've made that mistake even, but going into it as a prototype and something that we are piloting. Everyone loves a good pilot. And it's now become what we do, not because we decided one day, today is the day we're going to say we do this permanently, but our prototype and our pilot evolved into something that now we need.
How have you done that with interview and assessment methodology for different roles, whether it's engineering, product design, go-to-market, G&A?
Yeah. Similarly, there's two different things I would say. I'd say structured interviews are one of them. And then another I would even say is the technology behind BrightHire, which is an interview intelligence platform. Structured interviews, I started rolling those out even back in LinkedIn almost 11 years ago. I had a team that was going to be like, I don't know, growing by 40% in terms of their headcount. This was in the marketing business, marketing solutions business. And one of the problems was that the math just didn't math. The amount of interviews it was going to require us to get through and the time that we needed to hire and make these decisions did not math. The math was math. And this is part of the job of a recruiter, is that you need to understand math. You need to understand funnels and ratios and conversions. And so I got with the head of the department and I had explained to her that this was the challenge, this was the math, this was the amount of man hours it was going to take, man and woman hours, that it was going to take to get through all these interviews. And I also showed her all of the inefficiencies in the process and had given her examples of, this team has 8 steps in the process. This team only does 2. There's a problem. Like, we have a compliance, we have so many issues here. My recommendation is no more than 4, backed by the Google study that we've all heard, the law of diminishing returns in interviews, right? And so I really came to the table with data, and then I gave her a solution that would enable us to get through it in a certain period of time. But we had to stick to this many interviews. And then we had to stick to SLAs, meaning we are on the hook for delivering service level agreements, candidates, and time that we would get back to the team and time that we would deliver on like a candidate slate. In return, we would need candidates dispositioned, interviews taken if they needed to be rescheduled by this time, like all these things, feedback in the system, blah, blah, blah. And we ended up doing it. And we ended up delivering where in the past they had failed because no one had looked at the system. And I would also just share this. If you've ever read one of my favorite books, Atomic Habits by James Clear, in there he says, we do not rise to the level of the goal, hire all these people by June, as an example, but we fail to the level of the systems. And so if your systems are not set up in such a way where you know the math is going to math and you and your team are going to execute, then it's going to fail. And systems doesn't have to be Greenhouse and Workday. Yes, those have to be there, but even just what's your weekly cadence with your recruiting team? What's your weekly cadence with the business? That kind of thing. So that's one way, and that's pre-AI. I'd say that even with BrightHire, one of the easy sort of pain points and problems that we were having was we were having like some fraudulent interview activity and fraudulent hires. I'm sure you've heard of this. And now in the age of like post-COVID and AI and bots and all of these things that people are just now trying to understand, what's real? What's real? Applicant real? Is this person real? That will continue to be tested. With BrightHire, that was one of the clear problems, was that we had interviews happen in a black box. BrightHire, there's no black box anymore. You
Correct.
can go and relive the conversation. And so for us, it wasn't necessarily about the fear of fraudulent hires. That was one gateway in because that was the easy thing right in front of us. At the same time, it was like we can also minimize the amount of conversations we need because you can watch an interview back. You can search for words that you're looking for. You can get the answers quickly. You can calibrate. So if you're in a calibration and people are disagreeing, you can go back and watch the tape and you can make the decision, hiring manager who has the D, right? And so we were able to, in that case, connect with each stakeholder and give a clear case for the pain point that they were trying to solve, whether it was quality, speed of hire, doubt in their hiring manager's ability to interview. We were like, we could actually answer every one of these questions with this technology. So that was how we, in those two cases, how we were able to convince stakeholders to change process.
I love that. Shout out to Teddy and Ben,
Yeah.
especially for the acquisition. I remember the first time chatting with them, I was like, oh, these guys are different. Like they are building something that resonates with the business, especially when you look at their backgrounds. And I have also appreciated their go-to-market strategy, just as a marketer myself. They're at every event. They throw a great event themselves, but they're not running the typical go-to-market playbook. They're focused on conversations and solving real problems. For a while, interview transcription has had this marketing product messaging of, look, mom, no hands-free recruiting. Yeah, that's one piece. But as soon as we had interview transcription, the biggest glaring net positive for me was that recruiters are no longer flying blind for what happens after the hiring manager pass through. We have long wanted to be the fly on the wall. We've long tried to hold hiring managers accountable to incomplete scorecards. And now we have the data to do it. So yes, it's interview surveillance, but interview surveillance is a net positive when it comes to candidates getting the right role, hiring managers following the right process, and recruiters becoming talent advisors.
I agree. I will also say that the double click of that, because any new tech that you roll out, there's a crawl version of rolling it out to the team, a walk version, and a run version. I would say with my team, we're in the walk. So we've gone from the crawl to the walk. We're able to dig into the data and the insights on things like candidate talk ratio, on time starts, other sets of data. And then we are also in, I think, the more interesting part where we've turned on interview coaching. So if you've had an interview in the last 3 weeks, BrightHire will send you an AI generated assessment of your interview and it will give you feedback. And so when we were piloting this, in one of the assessments I had seen, it had said to the person, you do a great job of acknowledging their motivations and connecting that to our values. Where there's opportunity is we've noticed you're stacking questions. So if you and I were interviewing and I was interviewing you for a recruiter role, I'd say, Brandon, tell me a little bit about why you got into recruiting, what keeps you in it, what do you want next? Okay, I'm going to try and answer all 3 of those questions that you bucketed as one, but there's 3 different answers. And so it gave the feedback to this person of try to separate out your questions so that it's easier for the interviewer to answer them. So it gives great coaching feedback. And then my recruiters also have learned so much in always, especially when they're working with a hiring manager on either, and maybe they've worked with this person before, but a new role or even a new hiring manager, they go back and they watch the interviews because they learn even more. What is that person digging into? What do they really care about? That doesn't always come out in the intake or the kickoff. So it's making us better calibrated. We're moving quicker on decisions. We're surfacing better candidates for people, all in all. And it's making hiring managers better because of the coaching they're getting and recruiters better because of the coaching that they're getting. So all in all, it really is helping to fulfill the mission that BrightHire has, which is to give everyone the interview experience they deserve. Yeah.
I love it. I hope that this is the future and that AI only continues to offer candidates more of an opportunity to showcase their skills and have a chance at getting hired, because we hit this really high watermark on hiring. And when you look at the last 10 to 15 years of hiring, the majority of folks that are in recruiting have only hired in a bull market. So now that the market is shifting, there are going to be more candidates flooding the recs. We asked for this problem. I tell people this all the time. Like, recruiters said to the vendors, make it easier for folks to apply. And now we're asking our vendors to add friction, make it better for us to get a stronger signal for the right qualified candidate versus just an applicant that is a resume in a rec that may or may not have the skills and experience and motivation. But for the first time, like, we'll have this opportunity of storytelling. And I think AI will get us more granularity at the top of funnel. And that's only going to change the volume of candidates both recruiters and hiring managers see. The challenge, which you might already have arrived here, is it challenges what hiring managers know. Hiring managers in an employer's market are always saying things like, let's see who else is out there, or that person was pretty good, but is there anybody else? Can we get a couple more folks into the funnel? And I think recruiters will have to learn to coach hiring managers and say, hey, look, we're not going to have 20 folks in a first round interview. We've got 5. These are the 5. And if you would like to run your own process, you can. But our SLA states XYZ. And here's why we have more signal with 5 great folks. And we're not going to waste 3x the amount of time to get you however many more folks you want to see. What are your thoughts on that? I keep coming back to this one.
It's the purple squirrel. It's the purple squirrel story. I want a purple squirrel. There is not one. It does not exist. This goes back for me to like the LinkedIn days of a TAM. So at LinkedIn, at that time, Brendan Brown, and I don't know if you've interviewed Brendan yet, but he's fantastic. And he was our head of recruiting. And he would always say to us, what you learn here, you'll go on to become a head of TA somewhere else. Any of us have done that. It'd actually be interesting to see a study on how many former LinkedIn recruiters have now become heads of TA. But one of the things he used to talk about was data-driven recruiting. And when you run the search in LinkedIn Recruiter or JuiceBox, whatever your system is, what is the total addressable market that fits that profile? And a lot of times you would get a hiring manager that says it's this set of 50 things, and you run that search and you've got 3 people in the US, let's say that was the market that they were hiring in, that do that. But your math tells you need 50 to get to your 25 that might respond, to get to your 10 that might be worth a call. You know what I mean? And so I'm working backwards from that math. I say, pull them the math first. And you can do the kickoff call. And as the next step in the process, I'm going to come back and show you what comes up with your search. And we'll talk about that then and see profiles at a glance. Objectively, does this land for you? Usually, even then, they have tweaks. And so we're fine. Okay, how's this now? And how's this? And how's this? Till you get to that point where it's like, these are the profiles I want. Okay, great. I'm going to get them on the phone. And it's like setting the expectations of, I'm going to get you the 5 best. Now that we've opened up the candidate pool and the aperture a little bit, I'm going to get you the best. And I think part of it too, this is where the AI part, I'm not convinced yet on it, is like when it's been a long time since I've had a rec, but one of the key things I would do is talk to the best of the best on that team. I always did that. Who's your best manager? Let me talk to them. I want to know why. Yes. And then I would get into the psyche of this person and understand why. And I think that's the missing skills, resumes, blah, blah, blah. It's all paper, but it's the inside of the person that like makes that difference. And so I think that's the qualitative piece that you've got to do. And I would just genuinely ask yourself, have you done those things? That's been a formula that's worked for me always. Here's the math. How do we open up the aperture? And let me talk to your team.
I love that.
We're people, right? You just said it at the beginning. We are in the business of becoming best friends with people right away. And that's how you do it.
And candidates usually have 3 responses to that when it comes to the outreach or the ask. And that's the signal that you get for building a pipeline, for building your own personal like candidate bubble. One of the best compliments I ever received was from a CEO that said, like, how are these people in your orbit? Because we just got great signal. It was fast time to conversation. We would have a conversation, say, hey, I think we need this type of role. And it was in a startup. And great, let's just talk to these people. Let me get a few folks on your calendar. And it was such positive signal to hear that we were aligned. And I think a recruiter who wants to up-level themselves can really focus on that top of funnel alignment. But the only way to do that is by putting in the work. Like on your slow days, are you still connecting with people? Are you reading the market? Are you going out there and seeing who are some of these talent magnets that have moved recently? Obviously, if you're placing director, VP, execs, they should be able to build a team with them wherever they go. I always ask an exec, like, how are you going to build a team if you came in here and were VP of sales? If that person doesn't start naming names, they're probably not the right person.
Yeah.
For a startup. for startup. I don't want to say every role should be referral based or talent magnet based. We want to talk about inclusivity and hiring from underrepresented communities. And there is data out there that referrals can breed homogeneity. I've got a lot of case studies and a lot of experiences where when you source talent magnets and they come in and they build a team around them, like that is great recruiting. That is great sourcing. If you're not sourcing when you're recruiting, like what are you doing?
Yeah, it's like always be hiring, always be selling, always be hiring. I agree with you. And I think this is, again, tying it back to the AI conversation. It's like with recruiting, like many different industries or professions, there's art and there's science. I think AI is going to give us major lift on the science part, major lift. On the art part will be the biggest challenge for AI because it's human to human. It's that connection. I think it'll surface up even just what you said. Okay, who are the talent magnets and how do we even figure that out? But who's followed who and who's stayed connected? How do we map that? What's the talent graph, if you will? And then that next part, the art. That's where I think, and it'll be interesting to watch this back in 5 years and be like, was I wrong or was I right? But the art part, I just really don't think AI is going to be able to replace human judgment. And so I personally don't think recruiter jobs are going to be, this is where I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to, but I don't think recruiting jobs are going to be at risk. I do think it's the recruiters that don't figure out AI and how to help it create major leverage when it comes to that volume game. Because I think recruiters will be able to increase like hires per month for sure if they know what they're doing with AI. But the art of my relationship with my hiring managers and them trusting me and my relationship with my candidates and them trusting me, I don't think AI can touch that or replace it. And maybe I will be wrong in 5 years, but my human heart tells me I'm not. And that we still, AI I also fundamentally, ethically believe it should not replace human judgment in hiring decisions.
And I love that. Constantly talk with recruiters about the art and the science of recruiting. And it's one of my favorite talk tracks. When we think about what it takes to get to a handshake yes, an offer acceptance, a signature on the line, a start date on the calendar, an onboarding box mailed to that person working remotely from wherever. All the things that we live for. We also have to think about historically, how has recruiting technology been implemented? It's usually through pain on the employer side. They can't get the right people hired. And it's usually dictated by candidate behavior. And right now, candidates, I don't know about you, but like I don't use a ton of AI in how I connect with people, particularly around major financial decisions. So until we have candidates that are making major financial decisions with consumer level AI technology, I don't think we're going to see much of a displacement or replacement of recruiters further than we already have, in the fact that if you work 10 recs last month and I worked 10 recs last month, and then we implement AI and we get faster and we have better signal through noise, and all of a sudden you can work 15 recs and I can work 15 recs. Next year, we just replaced one headcount. That is how AI is replacing recruiters. It's not some robot coming in and running end-to-end processes. Right. There is no agentic end-to-end AI. The reason is because Siri sucks. Siri doesn't manage our calendars for us. So candidates don't have an agentic tool that they manage their operational life around. I'm excited about the art because recruiting, for the most part, in tech has been pretty easy. It's been pretty easy to get a job in tech that pays $100,000 a year to be a recruiter for some B2B SaaS company. There are tons of those folks out there with 2 to 4 years of experience who call themselves a recruiter, share that job title. And for the most part, they've been process pushers. Now it's time for folks to really separate and differentiate themselves, and who's going to stick it out when it gets hard, who's going to dedicate themselves to the craft. And the craft is rooted in human relationships and art. And the ones that can balance that with an understanding of AI at each stage of the candidate funnel and candidate journey will be the ones that have a job title called recruiter in the next few years. What advice do you have for a recruiter out there who's looking to stay plugged in and upskill as we uplift this community?
I would say, it's actually funny. I had my team read this book, The Trusted Advisor, and I swear I'm not sponsored by them, nothing. I just like it. I think it's a It's actually a critical book that I think anyone working with people or cross-functionally should read, The Trusted Advisor. And it's really about trust and relationships and how to deliver on value. Whether you're in sales, which I actually think we are all in sales. I'm not just talking about recruiting. It's like you're selling something, you're selling value, you're selling your opinion, you're selling whatever. I think that's a helpful book just to give perspective. To more directly answer your question, it's like my advice would be learn the art of relationships and learn the art of how to build trust and how to help solve the problem. And often I see the mistake of, and this is the advice I'd also give, is don't make the mistake of trying to force your solution down someone's throat, because that's often where I see it in HR, I see it in TA, I see it in a lot of places where you're not even aligned on the problem. And so aligning on the problem and making sure you have clear understanding of what that problem is and how you can help solve that problem is where the value and the trust in the relationship is created. So that would be my advice. And I think that just matters like in your entire career, no matter your profession, because it's the people that figure out how to help solve problems and how to add value that are the ones that you trust and you go back to and you want to work with again. And I always fantasize about one day maybe I'll start my own recruiting firm and I just want that core group of people I really trusted where you can march through that wall together of fire and you will get it done because you trust each other. And so I'd say the art of it is trust.
I love it. Harry, thank you so much for this conversation today. I have so many great tactical takeaways. How can people stay in touch with the work you're doing and the types of roles you're hiring for? And like, what are you hiring for right now?
Yeah, I would say stay in touch. Follow me on LinkedIn. I do post and I'm going to be doing more on video and sharing more about just my perspective and my lessons like in talent. And then I would say what we're hiring for, we have a new CTO at OneTrust. And so we are hiring for R&D roles across the company, across the States, across India. So R&D, product, engineering. And then we are, of course, hiring go-to-market and GA, but I'd say right now our engineering team is where it's at.
That's great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I really look forward to a fast friendship.
Thank you, Brandon. It was so great to meet you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on. It was a lot of fun.